Welcome everyone to another week of Ramban ala Parsha. I'm Eli Weber. Before we start, just a methodological point that I've noticed and hopefully I can bring out today. You know, there are two ways to look at substance in the Torah. Let's say Aseres HaDibros. There's the Aseres HaDibros, and then there's the event. And I think it's often the case that the Ramban stresses the event over the substance. Yes, this thing happened, and this is what HaKadosh Baruch Hu told us, but more important is the fact that he told us. More important is how he told us, and hopefully I can show this to you today. Obviously, Vaetchanan stretches between Moshe's introductory speech in the first four prakim, the first 4+ prakim of Sefer Dvarim, to the Chukim u'Mishpatim speech that starts at the end of Perek Daled. And the Ramban's still in the first part of the Parsha. The Parsha, you know, it continues the Tochacha, the stories. Moshe stresses the Meraglim, the Ma'apilim. And then you come to sort of a strange part of the Psukim. In Perek Daled, early in Perek Daled, you have Rak hishamer lecho shmor nafshecha ma'od, pen tishkach et hadivarim mashara'u einecho, pen yasu milvavcha kol yimei chayecha v'odatom levanecha v'livnei vanecha. What should you tell your children? Yom asher omadato lifnei Hashem Elokecha b'chorev, be'emor Hashem elai hakel li et ha'am va'ashmiim et divoroi, asher yilmedun li'roti kol hayamim asher heim chaim al ha'adama ve'et b'nehem yilamedun. Right? You should tell them exactly what happened. V'tikrivun v'tamdun tachat ha'esh, v'o'er bo'ei v'o'esh, right? Chosh hanan v'arafel, etc., etc. What's going on here? Why is Moshe emphasizing this so much? So says the Ramban. First he quotes Rashi. Raki shamer lecha pen tishkach et dvarim az kishalo tishkachum v'ta'asum al amitatam v'tachshvu chachamim u'nevonim. When you don't forget them, says Rashi, you'll remember the Aseres HaDibros. That's what we're talking about, and you'll be thought of as being smart. V'im tavtu otam mitoch shichacha tachshvu shotim lashon Rashi. And if you forget them, then you'll be thought of as being something less than smart. Okay. That's Rashi. What matters here is the substance. What matters here is Aseres HaDibros. Says the Ramban, ve'eino nachon klal. I disagree. Aval hakatuv hazeh lefi da'ati mitzvat lo ta'aseh. First of all, says the Ramban, it's a lo ta'aseh and it's an aseh. It's one of the sheish zichirot that the Ramban thinks are mitzvos probably every single day. He's here ba ma'od. Ki ka'asher amar shenizhar b'chol ha'mitzvot v'nishmor ha'chukim v'ha'mishpatim la'asotam. Right? Why is this emphasized so much by the Torah? Because the Torah tells us, Chazar v'amar rak ani mazhircha ma'od lehishamer v'lishmor atzmecha ma'od ma'od lizkor me'ayin ba'u elecha ha'mitzvot. Says the Ramban, it's not just the substance of the mitzvot. I want you to remember where the mitzvot came from. Shelo tishkach Maamad Har Sinai mikol hadivarim mashera'u shameinecha hakolot v'halapidim et kvodo ve'et gadlo udvarav asher shamata mitoch ha'esh. Says the Ramban, God could have come to Har Sinai and said gibberish, which we'll see later maybe is what we heard. But it doesn't matter what he said. What matters is that there was a hashras hashchina. What you're supposed to remember is Maamad Har Sinai, not just Aseres HaDibros. V'todia kol hadvarim asheru einach b'ma'amad hanichbad ahu levanecha v'livnei vanecha ad olam. That's what you tell your children. Less you tell your children about kabedas avicha v'esimecha, and more you tell them, you know what? I met HaKadosh Baruch Hu on Har Sinai. There were kolot uvrakim. There was an anan kaved alahar. It was the greatest sound and light show you ever saw in your life. Upirish hatam ki Hashem asa ha'ma'amad hahu kidei shetilmedu li'iro to kol hayamim. Right? The primary purpose was to fear God. Tilmedun lidorot olam. Imkain asu atem kacha va'al tishkechu oto. The prohibition is to forget Ma'amad Har Sinai. The prohibition is not to forget one of the Aseres HaDibros. Not, God forbid, saying Aseres HaDibros aren't important. They really are. But Maamad Har Sinai was more important. Why was it more important? I'm skipping a little bit. Says the Ramban, V'hato'elet b'mitzvah hazot gidola ma'od. What's the benefit? She'im hayu divrei HaTorah ba'im eleinu mipi Moshe bilvad. Let's say we knew. Moshe Rabbeinu told us Aser Sadibros. Af al pi she'nevuato nit'amta ba'otot uv'movtim. And Moshe did miracles to prove that he was being a real Navi. Im yakum b'kirbenu Navi o cholem chalom. If another Navi gets up, v'yitzavenu behefech min HaTorah, and he tells us something against the Torah, v'natan elenu oto mofet yikanes safek b'lev ha'anashim. Of course I believe Moshe Rabbeinu, but somebody's standing right in front of me and he's doing miracles. And he's telling me not to keep Shabbos. How do I know? I have a suffix. Aval, says the Ramban, kishem magia elenu HaTorah mipi hagvura. But when we receive the Torah firsthand, le'oznenu ve'einenu, literally to our ears and our eyes, horo'ot, ve'ein sham emtsa'i, says the Ramban, at Maamad Har Sinai, Klal Yisrael, 600,000 men between the ages of 20 and 60, probably 2 million women and children, they were all Nevi'im. They were prophets. They didn't watch Moshe, they listened to God. And they heard the Dibros firsthand. Therefore, nakchish kol cholek v'chol misaper u'neshaker oto. We'll make him into a liar. Lo yoilu ot. Lo yatzilu mofet min amita biyatenu ki anachnu hayodim b'shikrotenu. We know he's lying. How do we know he's lying? Because we were at Har Sinai. Because at Har Sinai, HaKadosh Baruch Hu made the greatest Gilui Shechina that was ever going to be. We experienced it completely. We understood it completely. We were Nevi'im. All of Klal Yisrael were Nevi'im, and that's the major part. When we remember Har Sinai every day, we're not remembering Aser Sadibros. We're remembering the Gilui Shechina. We're remembering the experience we went through when we experienced firsthand HaKadosh Baruch Hu's voice, and then whatever happened, happened. But that's the major part of Maamad Har Sinai. That's what the Ramban thinks is the mitzvah. That's where he disagrees fundamentally with Rashi. We're supposed to remember the experience. The substance will come later. The substance is secondary to the experience, and the experience was nothing more and nothing less than us being Nevi'im. And if we could be Nevi'im, then of course we'll believe Moshe Rabbeinu. Okay, that's part of the original speech. Now we go to the actual speech, the main speech of Sefer Dvarim, what's called the Chukim and the Mishpatim. And here we come across something interesting. Says the Torah at the beginning of Parak Hey, Vayikra Moshe el Kol Yisrael Vayomer Aleim Shema Yisrael et HaChukim ve'et HaMishpatim. That's the beginning of the new speech. Asher Anochi dover ba'oznechem hayom ulemadatem otam ushemartem la'asotam. Okay, now the Torah starts describing what's going to happen. Hashem Elokeinu karati manu brit b'choreb. God made a covenant with us. Lo et avotenu karat Hashem et habrit hazot ki itanu anachnu eila po hayom kulonu chayim. He did it with us. Panim b'fanim diber Hashem imachem bahar mitoch ha'esh. God spoke to us face to face. Anochi omeid bein Hashem uveinechem ba'et hahi lahagid lachem et dvar Hashem ki yireitem mipnei ha'esh v'lo alitem bahar lemor. Says Moshe, I stood between you at that time, right? Anochi omeid bein Hashem uveinechem ba'et hahi. Why? Because you were afraid. Ki yireitem mipnei ha'esh v'lo alitem bahar lemor. What was Moshe doing between them? Here it's very important to point out, because the Ramban's going to disagree with everybody who came before him. Says the Ramban, first Rashi, I think. Ki hu haya ole lahar v'shomea divrei Hashem v'yored v'omer lohem ad shedvar Hashem imahem panim b'fanim, etc., etc. Okay? Says Rashi, Moshe Rabbeinu served as the go-between. He went up to Har Sinai, he went down to Har Sinai, he told the people what God said. Okay, that's Rashi. There's also in Ibn Ezra. The Ramban disagrees with all of it. Ve'eino nachon. What is true? V'hanachon be'enai. Ki yirmoz l'mashe perashnu sham. It hints to what we said back in Parshas Yisro and Sefer Shmos. Ki Yisrael lo hevinu mipi hagvura ela anochi v'lo yihiyeh lecha. Says the Ramban there, right? In the big discussion, what did Klal Yisrael hear directly? What didn't they? So we know that Rashi, following the Gemara at the end of Makos, says God told us the first two dibros, which is sort of seen by the fact that they're written in second person. Anochi Hashem Elokecha liyelecha Elohim achrim al panai. Right? That's first person. That's what the Gemara says at the end of Makos, where the Gemara says Torah tzivolonu Moshe. Moshe gave us Torah b'gematria 6:11. The other two we heard directly from God. Says the Ramban, no. The first two we heard from God and we understood. Ushar hadibrot, Moshehu hamagid lahem mashe yomar Hashem, v'zeu lahagid lachem et dvar Hashem, lefaresh lahem kol dibur v'dibur. Says the Ramban, Klal Yisrael heard all 10 dibrot from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It happens to be the first two dibrot we understood completely. The last 8, Moshe had to explain to us. But he wasn't a go-between. Maybe he helped us to understand better, but we heard it directly from God. For some reason, and it's too hard and I don't fully understand how I would explain it, we didn't understand Dibros 3 through 10. We understood 1 and 2. We didn't understand 3 through 10. And Moshe Rabbeinu had to translate them for us. I'm skipping in the same Ramban. If you're following inside by chance, it's Perek Hey, Pasuk Hey. Says the Ramban, V'hitchil levaer lahem. Let's get to the most famous, I think, of the deviations between Parshas Vaetchanan, the Aseret Dibros here, and Parshas Yisro, the Aseret Dibros there. Zacha v'shamar b'dibur echad. Okay, that means God said both. I'm not sure the Ramban really believes that. V'hitchil levaer lahem shamar b'makom zachar al derech hapshat. V'al Da'at Rabotenu b'dibur echad nemra. I think the Ramban is saying God said Zachar in both cases. It was always Zachar. Moshe Rabbeinu had to give them the explanation of Zachar. The explanation of Zachar, says the Ramban, is Shamar. You have to guard Shabbos also. Chazal came later and said Zachar Shamar v'Zachar b'dibur echad nemru. I'm not 100% sure in the Ramban that he thinks that that's how it happened, although in substance it's the same thing. Ki heim kulam yodim zachar, v'hu yodiem ki shamor ne'emar imo. Everybody knows zachar yom HaShabbat lekadesho. And then the Ramban says Moshe had to explain to them that part of zachar, there may be a much deeper idea going on here, but part of zachar is shamor. Part of sanctifying Shabbos is guarding Shabbos. Okay, but that's not really the biggest deviation. That's just the most famous one. It's the end of Shabbos that we should focus on, right? Shamar Yom HaShabbat lekadesho kashet tzivcha Hashem Elokecha sheish yamim tavod v'sikom lachtecha b'yom hashvi, etc. Okay, then you get to Lo ta'aseh kol melacha ata uvincha uvitecha v'avdecha v'amatecha v'shacha v'chamocha v'chol b'emtecha v'gercha Hashem v'shirecha. Why? This is new. Leman yanuach avdecha va'amatecha kamocha, so that your slaves and your bondswomen can rest like you. V'zacharta ki eved hayita be'eretz Mitzrayim vayotziacha Hashem Elokecha misham biyad chazaka v'zrua netuya al kein tzivecha Hashem Elokecha lasot et Yom HaShabbat. That's completely new. What did we have in Yisro? We had ki sheish yamim asa Hashem et Hashem v'asarat et hayom et kol hashabam v'yonach b'ashvi al kein beirach Hashem et Yom HaShabbat v'yikadesheu. It's zeicher l'maaseh bereishis. All of a sudden, it appears to have moved from zeicher l'maaseh bereishis to zeicher l'tzias Mitzrayim, and the Ramban's going to deal with this. First, he quotes a Rambam in the Moreh Nevuchim that he doesn't fully disagree with, but we'll pick up at the very end. V'inei b'Shabbat b'klala shnei ta'amin. Ta'amin. There are two reasons for Shabbos. Leha'amin b'chidush ha'olam, ki yesh eloka borei. There is a God who created the world. That's zeicher l'maaseh bereishis. V'lizkor od ha'chesed ha'gadol she'asa imanu, she'anachnu avodav asher kana oto lo la'avodim. The second part is zeicher l'tzias Mitzrayim. God purchased us. God owns us because he took us out of Egypt. Ki gam ze eino mechuvar etzli. I'm a little unclear. Ki bihiyotenu shovtim v'lo na'asem melacha b'yom hashvi'i. Let's say we're resting on Shabbos, Zecher L'Tzias Mitzrayim. Ein lanu bezeh zikaron L'Tzias Mitzrayim. How's anybody going to know that this is Zecher L'Tzias Mitzrayim? Ve'ein l'ro'eh otanu b'telim b'melacha yidiyah bezeh. Who's going to see me resting on Shabbos and think, oh, he's doing this, Zecher L'Tzias Mitzrayim? Raki kishar kol ha-mitzvot. It'll be like any mitzvah. Aval yihiyeh bo Zecher l'maaseh b'reishit shenishbot biyom sheshavas Hashem vayinofash. It's always going to be Zecher l'maaseh b'reishit, says the Ramban. Everybody in the world knows. Why do we have a week of 7 days? It doesn't correspond to anything in science. Doesn't correspond to any cycles. The month is a lunar cycle. The year is 12 lunar cycles. 7 days is nothing. 7 days, as everyone in the world knows, and everybody in the world, except for some strange period in the Middle Ages in France, keeps a 7-day period of a week. Whether they're atheists, whether they're agnostics, whether they're frum, they keep 7 days. So everybody knows that I rest on Shabbos because that's the day that God rested when he created the world. V'hara'u yoter lomar, it would be more appropriate to say, ki ba'avur hayot yitziat Mitzrayim, moreh al eloka kadmon. What's Yitzias Mitzrayim? Yitzias Mitzrayim tells me there was a God who pre-existed the world. Mechadesh, he makes new things. Chafetz v'yachol, he has a desire and the ability. Kasher parashti b'dibu harishon. Al kein omar bekan, im ya'aleh belibcha safek al hashabat hamoreh al hachidush v'achefetz v'yacholet. If for whatever reason you have some doubt about Shabbos, because nobody saw Brias HaOlam. God created the world. We believe that God created the world, but we know that God took us out of Mitzrayim. Those are the two sort of, the two perfect ways. We believe Zecher L'Tzias Mitzrayim, Zecher L'Maaseh Bereshit, but they're different. Tizkor ma shera'u einecha b'Yitzias Mitzrayim, shehi lecha l'ra'aya u'lezecher. If you have a doubt about Zecher L'Maaseh Bereshit, think about Zecher L'Tzias Mitzrayim. Think about what it says about God. Hinei haShabbat Zecher L'Tziat Mitzrayim. V'Yitziat Mitzrayim Zecher L'Shabbat. Right? It's a little hard because it's the same thing back and forth. But he says, Shabbos is Zecher L'Tzias Mitzrayim. And Zecher L'Tzias Mitzrayim tells us about Shabbos. Ki yizkeru bo v'yomru Hashem hu ha'mechadesh b'chol ototu movtim v'oseh b'kol kirtzono. Kihu asher bara kol b'maaseh bereshit, v'zeh tam al kein tzivcha Hashem Elokecha lasot et yom haShabbat. Hinei lo pireish kan tam hashvita. Torah doesn't tell us why we rest. Ki sheishita mimasa Hashem. Shekvar huzkar zeh pamim rabot b'Torah. I understand the Torah's told me 1,000,000 times I rest on the 7th day because God worked for 6 days. Aval amar biktsara v'yom hashvi Shabbat l'Hashem Elokecha. Shehu yitbarach shavat bo va'inafash. Ube'er lahem ki mitziat Mitzrayim yedu'u shehu amar v'haya ha'olam v'shavat mimenu. Says the Ramban, you need both. There's no question that Shabbos is Zecher L'Maaseh Bereshit. There's also no question that we have doubts about Maaseh Bereshit because we weren't there. We believe it. We believe it completely. But okay, there's a difference between that and Yitziat Mitzrayim, where my great-great-grandfather told me, and his great-grandfather told him, and his great-grandfather. And it's not just that we believe or that we know that God took us out of Egypt. It shows that God controls nature. It shows that God has a desire to be involved in the world. It shows all the things that we think make God unique. So says the Ramban essentially, and I think it's close to the Rambam, although slightly different, I need both. I need both models. I need Zecher L'Maaseh Bereshit. I need Zecher L'Yetziat Mitzrayim. And the fact that Shabbos is primarily Zecher L'Maaseh Bereshit, but supplementally and secondarily, it's also Zecher L'Yetziat Mitzrayim. Those two things together give me, the regular average Jew, the understanding and the commitment and the belief that I need to keep Shabbos. Okay. Let's move on. We're still in Perek Hey after Aseret Sedevos. There's obviously 1,000,000 things we could have done there. We come to the following psukim. This is the after Aseret Sedevos. Krav ata u'shema eit kol asher yomar Hashem Elokeinu. Va'at, you Moshe Rabbeinu, go up and get the Torah. Va'at tedaber eleinu, and you give it to us. Ve'ed kol asher yidaber Hashem Elokeinu elecha v'shamanu v'asinu. We will absolutely listen to the Torah, but we don't want it directly anymore. You go up to Har Sinai, you get the Torah, not us. Right? Vayishma Hashem et kol divrechem b'daberchem elai, vayomer Hashem elai, shamati et kol divrei ha'am asher hazeh asher dibru elecha, heitivu kol asher diberu. Okay, there's a sense that Moshe Rabbeinu was a little disappointed that Klal Yisrael didn't want to get the Torah directly, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu said it's fine. And he says, "Umi tein va'yalav avam zeh lahem lirot tiv lishmor kol mitzvotai kol hayamim lemani tav lahem v'livnehem lo'olam." Right? It's great that they have yiras shamayim. So the Ramban points this out. We won't read it inside. That ki'ilu Moshe is disappointed, but God is not at all disappointed. God seems fine. Okay, now the question is, what happened, and what's really going on? So says the Ramban on Pasuk Chaf Daled, Va'at daber eleinu, I'll pick up in the middle, V'ha'inyan ka'asher perashti sham, ki hayu choshvim sheyirtzeh lahashmiyam kol HaTorah. Klal Yisrael didn't know Aseret HaDevarim at the time. They assumed that God was going to keep talking, that God was going to give them the entirety of the Torah, not just Aseret HaDibros. And that was way too much for them. Ki hayu choshvim sheyirtzeh lahashmiyam kol HaTorah v'haratzon haya lefanav lahashmiyam aseret hadibrot bilvad kasher bikshu. God had no intention to give them the whole Torah. He was going to just give them aseret hadibros. V'da ki ata bikshu mi Moshe shelo yishmu kol Hashem hanichbad lo bayom hazeh v'lo bidor min hadorot la'olam. Remember before we mentioned that at Maamad Har Sinai we were all Nevi'im and we heard God speak directly. Now, says the Ramban, Bnei Yisrael said, we can't trust ourselves to hear God, not now and not ever. Delav kol shaita v'shaita misrachesh nisa. Says Klal Yisrael, it's a miracle that we heard God speak and that we lived. The pasuk says, okay, I can't find the pasuk right now, but the fact is, it's a miracle. Ve'einam chafetzim b'mamad kazeh. We're not going to rely on a miracle again. Aval ya'aminu b'neviyim v'ya'asu kol ritzon Hashem al pihem. Says the Ramban, in this moment, when Klal Yisrael said, we can't hear God directly anymore, we needed a Navi. We needed Moshe to step up, and we needed Nevi'im for the rest of time. Because Klal Yisrael made a decision. We're not on the level, we can't risk hearing God directly. Therefore, there needs to be a Navi. V'chein yomar lahem Moshe. No, that's where the parasha of the Nevi'im comes up. Navi mikir b'cha me'achecha kamoni yakim lacha Hashem Elokecha elav tishma'un. Kichol asher sha'alta me'im Hashem Elokecha b'choreb. It's exactly what you said at Har Sinai, right? You said we can't hear God anymore. We're too afraid. So therefore, we have to bring Nevi'im. Imkain hashe'ela hazot lidorot haita. If that's the case, Klal Yisrael are not just saying we don't want to hear God right now. We can't hear God directly ever again. Not us, not our children, not our grandchildren. Therefore, the institution of prophecy, it was created now. Of course, there were prophets before, but the opportunity to hear God directly, the opportunity to hear the Torah directly, was turned down by Klal Yisrael in favor of Nevi'im. And again, Moshe was disappointed by this. God, it seems, was not only disappointed by this, but understood it completely. Understood it as a form of Yiras Shamayim, understood it as something that was necessary, and therefore Nevi'im became not b'di'eved, as Moshe would have it, but lechatchila. Right? I wonder if Moshe, as a Navi, thought of it as b'di'eved, and Klal Yisrael, as non-Nevi'im, thought of it as lechatchila, but it seems like Moshe lost this argument, or Moshe's understanding was wrong, and God's was correct. Okay. So much for Aseret HaDibros, so much for the main substance of the parsha. There's one last thing I want to do, because I think it gets short shrift compared to the same exact Ramban at the beginning of Kedoshim. Okay, if you look in Perek Zayin, Pasuk Yud Chet, you find something interesting. This is now the Chukim u'Mishpatim, the substance of what HaKadosh, of what's in the Torah. And you have something strange. Okay, it's Perek Vav Pasuk Yud Chet. Va'asita hayashar va'atov b'nei Hashem l'man yitav lach uvata v'yarashta et ha'aretz hatavar shenishba Hashem la'avotecha. Okay, it's a beautiful pasuk. Everybody knows it. But says the Ramban, there's something more going on here than would appear. The Ramban says as follows: V'asita hayashar va'atov b'nei Hashem al derech hapshat yomar tishmeru mitzvot Hashem ve'edotav v'chukotav u'techavein ba'asiyatam la'asot hatov hayashar be'inav bilvad. Okay, you should have kavanah when you do mitzvos that you're doing the will of God. U'leman yitav lach ha'havtacha, and it'll be good for you. Yomar ki ba'asotcha hatov be'inav yitav lacha. Right, not only that, God will be good to you. Schar va'onesh, you do good, God will be good to us. Ki Hashem meitiv latov v'lisharim b'libotam. Okay, a beautiful pasuk that God is good to the people who are good. U'lerabotenu bazeh midrash yafeh. Says the Ramban here, there's a medrash that I agree with. Amru zo pshara v'lifnim mishurat hadin. That's that you're not keeping the exact halacha. This is where we introduce the idea of compromise. Va'kavana bazeh ki mitchila amar shetishmor chukotav ve'edotav asher tzivcha. Va'ata yomar gam ba'asher lo tzivcha tein da'atcha la'asot hatov ha'yashar be'inav ki hu ohev hatov ha'yashar v'zeh inyan gadol. Says the Ramban, remember when I told you Parshas Kedoshim, right? Kedoshim Tihiyu, that there's something in the Torah that's not written? Meaning, there are two ways to look at the Torah. One is, HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives us all the rules. HaKadosh Baruch Hu never told me I have to pay my taxes. So if he never told me I have to pay my taxes, maybe I don't have to pay my taxes. Says the Ramban, no. God gave us enough halacha in the Torah for us to fill in the blanks. Kedoshim Tiyu fills in the blanks. Don't be a naval b'shus HaTorah. Va'asisa hayashar v'hatov fills in the blanks. If you ask yourself, should I do something or not? Ask yourself, is it yashar v'tov? Then if you say to yourself, how do I know? The answer is look in the Torah. There's enough halacha that I could know what's right. And the main point, Lefi she'i efshar lahazkir batorah kol hanhagot ha'adam im shchenav v'reyav v'chol masa'o u'matano v'tikunei ha'yishuv v'hamdinot kulam. Says the Ramban, the details of social interactions, the details of every single thing I have to do, it's too much for the Torah to tell me. The Torah tells me enough, and I have to fill in the blanks. But the chiddush of the Ramban is, there aren't any blanks in the Torah. It's not that God forgot to address, what do I do if my car bumps into my neighbor's car? I know I'm supposed to leave a note with my name and my number. How do I know that? Vasita ayashar vatov. The Torah has given me enough for me to fill in the blanks. And they're not really blanks. Says the Ramban, the Torah can't cover every situation. Therefore, there are psukim like Kedoshim Tiyu, the famous one, or the equally famous one starting now, Va'asita hayashar vatov. Says the Ramban, they're not blanks. The Torah, it's too much for the Torah to give us every case. The Torah gives us the main cases and then tells us to fill in the blanks. Okay? That's what we have for today. We had the first Ramban, that we were Nevi'im, that the substance of Maamad Har Sinai was less important than the form that it took, that we were Nevi'im. Secondly, we were at Har Sinai and we didn't want to be Nevi'im forever. We thought God was going to give us the whole Torah there, and it was too much for us. And that caused us to introduce the concept of Nevi'im into the Torah. Shabbos, Zachar v'Shamar, HaKadosh Baruch Hu said Zachar, Moshe explained it by way of Shamar. Okay, but the more important thing is that Shabbos is both Zeicher L'Maaseh Bereishis and Zeicher L'Tzias Mitzrayim, as we explained. And finally, the Chiddush of Asisa Hayashar V'Hatov, which is, there are no blanks, there's nothing left out of the Torah. HaKadosh Baruch Hu told us V'Asisa Hayashar V'Hatov, and that is a mitzvah that covers the blanks, and we should figure out on our own from the rest of the Torah what goes in there. Have a great, great week. Shabbat Shalom, and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.